And we do have Angie Setzer here. So for you guys that are interested in the agricultural markets, the grain markets, we have the goddess of grains here. So Angie, I'm going to make you the presenter, and looking forward to meeting you, hearing your voice, and seeing your screen. And thank you for taking time out of your day to join F.A.C.E.
Can you hear me now?
I hear you. I can, right. Angie. Thank you. All right, great to meet you.
Good to meet you guys too. I'm excited, and like I said, I'm working with one arm tied behind my back. I'm typically sitting in my office at home with two screens and ready to go. And right now I'm sitting in a hotel room in Chicago with my laptop.
My kind of tunnel.
Yeah, that's what.
My hometown. So you know, I usually start off asking people, you know, about the beginning of their journey, and I'd like to ask you about that. But I'm guessing that you got into the business because it's in your DNA.
Pretty much, yeah. I joke there's mud in my blood. So I grew up on a farm. I spent a lot of time in a tractor when I was a kid. Watched my grandfather. You know, he grew up on a farm as well. We grew up in rural Michigan, so you really didn't have many other options. But he decided, he was a tractor salesman most of his life, decided he was going to go into farming and started out on his own and built up a pretty solid farm. My dad farmed with him and my uncle, and so I spent a lot of time in a tractor as a kid, but I never realized that this was a profession.
Okay, so what were you saying when you were growing up, you know, I love the farm, but I'd really like to try something different before you ended up becoming a trader, focusing on agricultural markets? Did you have another dream?
Yeah, I was actually going to be a counselor. A middle school counselor was my goal. I mean, my first dream was to be a meteorologist, but I am not so great at science. So I went to school to be a teacher for a minute, and that was going to be my stepping stone. And I looked around and realized that there were an awful lot of teachers or people that wanted to be teachers too. So I thought, well, I'll just graduate with an English degree, see what happens. And fast forward 15 years, and here I am. So I ended up getting into a
You still are a teacher. I've listened to a few of your podcasts. So there are different ways to teach, and I always loved the grain markets, the ag markets. You know, when I was a runner on the floor, the pork belly pit was the biggest pit, most volume on the floor. So I'm going back a long way. Cattle and hogs as well. I was at the CME, not at the Board of Trade, but I always loved the grains, how they were great technical markets. And you know, one thing about the grains is that you can't print wheat. The Fed can't control as much, have influence over the grain markets. It's more about Mother Nature, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, definitely. So, I am a commodities fan. That's, you know, anything grains and oilseeds specifically. But yeah, it's all about Mother Nature and what we're able to provide, you know, and population continues to grow and it gets more interesting, it seems, by the day, even though we've been kind of flat as of late price-wise.
Yeah, so the strength has been in the livestock, right? And that's because we've had less supply of livestock, therefore less demand for feed grains. Is that behind the weakness or the stagnancy in the grain markets as of late, or is it just general commodity deflation that has been the reason that it's been lackluster?
Oversupply has been the main thing. I mean, we talk about farmers being really good at what they do, and so our biggest struggle as of late has just been the fact that we've been able to provide significant supplies to the global marketplace. And then we have some skewed issues, I would say, or you know, perhaps some not clear pictures of what's going on. A lot of folks will talk about the the global pipeline and things like that. And just like in your outside commodity markets, we've seen China do some really interesting or make some really interesting moves with their stocks and things like that. So a lot of times you'll hear people talk about the burdensome global wheat supplies. And reality is 48% of the world's wheat supplies are sitting in the hands of the Chinese. And China is still importing significant or reasonably significant amounts of wheat. So they have over almost half of the world's supplies, yet they're still bringing more in. And so that tells me that.
Go ahead.
That tells me that we're, it may not be clear, but it tells me that, for one, those stocks are not going to make it into the global pipeline anytime soon. China is not going to be a wheat exporter. And it also makes me question whether or not there's a validity in the idea that we have this burdensome supply, because reality is we're one production hiccup in wheat away from, going from basically feast to famine. And with our growing world population, we're basically, like I said, one production hiccup away from an explosive move to the upside is my opinion. And it's just a matter of time before that happens.
Okay, so that's a very interesting view, and I want to talk a little bit about that. But the Chinese are hoarders. Okay, so maybe they're taking a lesson from Joseph, and they're expecting the same thing. Any other reason you could think why they're stockpiling this much wheat and continue to be a buyer?
Well, I think that the reality is that they can say that they're stockpiling this much wheat. I mean, you can't really see it. It's not as though we've seen shiny bins sitting on dotting the Chinese landscape. We haven't seen grain piles.
Maybe they stored in their ghost cities.
That's just, that could be. It's what's actually filling those apartments. Is wheat. I joke that they have corn in their old Olympic swimming pools. And that's the thing is they talk all the time. They've got 38% of the world's corn and 48% of the world's wheat, supposedly, based on what the USDA has to say. And it seems like that would be a bit more visible. 4 billion bushel of corn and wheat. It should be something that you would see, at least in my opinion. And so it's just been an interesting thing, because I think part of the dynamic in that is that they need low food prices. And we saw in 2012, from about 2006 to 2013, actually, we saw a significant increase in corn, wheat, and soybean prices, and it really kind of put a pinch on them. And so the easiest way to kind of correct that, of course, would be to say that you're sitting on these burdensome supplies of wheat or corn, whatever it may be, and that has worked. I mean, if you look back, and of course this is just a year chart, but if you look back at 5 years in wheat.
Yeah, look at that. What was the high? Around $8.90 or $9?
Yeah, and that was in Chicago wheat, which is soft red wheat, which is a lower protein source. It's more used for cakes, pastries, things like that. In your spring wheat and in your hard red wheat, you saw significantly higher highs, because that is your food wheat, your breads, your pastas, your things of that nature. And so we saw a real significant spike up there.
Was that a flooding event in like North Dakota and places like that? That was a weather market that took it up there, Angie? What was the cause?
Yes. Yeah, drought, I believe. If I go back in time, it was a drought issue and a big production shortage that we saw. And at that time, like I said, China had not yet begun stockpiling. They'd actually just really entered into the market as an importer. Between about 2007 to 2011, we suddenly saw this burst in buying. And so you saw this burst in buying, combined with, of course, the ethanol movement in the corn market. Yes. You saw a one-third increase in demand, a 5 billion bushel demand explosion in corn. And then in 2012, on the corn side, we had a significant drought. So you saw this huge buildup in demand a demand explosion, you could say, and then followed up quickly by a supply side struggle. And so we saw a real significant pop in prices that encouraged a growth in production worldwide. So you saw Russia come in. Russia is now the world's largest wheat exporter. And so you saw them step in. You've seen South America really expand their production. And so it's been one of those things that now we have this idea that we have a surplus supply. But the talk is, or the question is, as the population continues to grow and the population changes how they want to eat, which is what you've seen in the livestock sector with pork and cattle,
Right.
how is that going to impact us going forward?
All right, so one of the triggers of drought, at least a theory that I believe in, is the difference between El Nino and La Nina. And I know that there's a La Nina developing out there. Are you a believer, having one time had an interest in meteorology, that this could be the hiccup? A La Nina year normally leads to potential droughts in the Midwest?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something to watch. A lot of folks are saying that this La Nina is going to be mild in comparison to some that we've seen, but we have seen drought conditions, remain in place or continue to grow again in Montana, which a lot of folks will say, well, that's not the Midwest, which is true, but they are a very significant producer of spring wheat. So it'll be something that we'll want to monitor as we work our way through the winter time into the spring planting season, because we did have a spring wheat production shortage this past year due to the drought in the Dakotas and Montana. In the southern plains, it's already starting to show up. They've been very dry down that way, and that has impacted what we've seen for early winter wheat development, because in the southern plains and throughout much of the eastern corn belt area, wheat is planted in the fall, spends the winter in dormancy, and then comes alive, grows, and is harvested the following year. So the winter weather will have a big impact on that. And so that's something we're definitely watching as we work our way through. The biggest receiver, the biggest impact that La Nina will have over the winter when it comes to markets or any sort of development there will be what happens with the South American crop. You tend to see Brazil and Argentina be more heavily impacted by La Nina, and their growing season is actually just really getting underway here. It's kind of like their June down that way, and we are seeing some significant, we're in the southern hemisphere. We're seeing some significant dry conditions starting to develop in Argentina, and they are one of our larger corn export competitors. Wheat exports are generally large out of Argentina, and soybeans out of Brazil. So we'll definitely be monitoring that as well. It has impacted Australia as well. Australia's start to their wheat growing season has been rough too. So it'll be something that we'll be monitoring because it can have some real significant global impact.
Well, when I was a young man, we used to have a war chant, Angie, beans in the teens. And beans in the teens, remember, and it did happen. Can we take a look at a longer term bean chart? Take a look at that.
That direction.
Yeah, because that's also a big protein source for Asia. And, as the middle class grows, more and more demand for bean products. Is there a shot that we could see beans in the teens again? I mean, they're not that far away. What was the high, about 15 during that 2011?
Actually, yeah. In 2012, we were up into, let's see if this will pull up for me here. Of course, it doesn't want to now because we need it.
Here it comes.
1 second. Did it pull up for you? I'm looking at the 5-year, which actually will be, it seems like just yesterday, but it was 6 years ago. There we go.
Okay, there you are. 16.
Yeah. So here you go back 2013 here, July of 2013, we saw them trading, 1604. If I can pull up the 20-year, 18 bucks, 17 bucks was the high end of things there in July of 2012. And, we've seen beans stay significantly supported. I mean, of
Yeah,
course,
they're making higher lows here, aren't they, Angie?
Yeah,
From a
yeah,
year ago.
definitely. And that's something to be watched. That's, like I said, that's the La Nina impact, the unknowns over what's going to happen with South American production, the concerns that we could see some cutbacks there. Chinese demand has not gone down at all. In fact, we're looking at China importing a record amount of soybeans this year, 100 million metric ton, which is a significant amount of soybeans that they're looking to take in. And so any sort of production hiccup will push beans back up pretty solidly, especially if we were to have a double whammy with a Brazil production issue and followed up with a U.S. production issue. There is some concern, of course, that if Brazil has a reasonable crop and with prices still supported compared to what you're looking at in corn, there's an idea that we could see an increase in bean planted acres next year and potentially see the market start to kind of fade a bit more than what it has. But that's been a market call by many analysts for the last 3 years. So eventually a broke clock's right, twice a day or something. But the reality is we're seeing higher lows. We're seeing a real consolidation in the pattern. If you just look at the last 3 months, really, we put a low in place and we saw that kind of dip down there. But reality is we've really kind of seen sort of some consolidation come in and the market does not have any desire at this point to move really away from this $10 range, which is a comfortable number and fits the supply. But like I said, any sort of in supply hiccup coming out of South America will definitely send this market quite a bit higher because investors have found over the last couple years that they've made more money by betting on soybeans moving higher than they have either corn or wheat, just on the grain side. Because again, right now China has a perceived shortage, so to speak, versus their demand when it comes to soybeans. And they have an overabundance of corn and wheat, like we discussed earlier.
Any dollar effects, strong dollar, weak dollar, currency effects on grain markets? Yeah,
I mean, they're huge, actually. With the competitive global market structure that we're in, with supply availability elsewhere being as large as what it is, we really have benefited or at least seen some strength in exports when our dollar is weaker. It makes us more competitive versus South America and Russia and others out there. So it's one of those things where you almost feel guilty as a grain trader rooting for a weaker dollar just because of the other impacts that it can have. But reality is a weak dollar helps with not only our meat exports, our dairy exports, but it definitely you'll see the real significant impact when it comes to wheat exports and corn, and then soybeans, of course, versus Brazil, because they're our biggest competition. There's really two main whole bean export suppliers to China. And with Brazil having an overabundance of leftover crop from their record crop last year, we need that dollar, that weaker dollar, to kind of give us that competitive advantage. Of course, we produce the highest quality, most reliable crop, but money talks more so than anything. And so we definitely monitor the currency moves very closely to kind of give us an indication as to what that'll mean for exports as we move ahead.
And is the ethanol and using food for energy, since prices have declined in oil, although they're on the rebound and they actually look pretty good, is that still a big factor in the corn and bean market, or has that fallen out of favor with lower energy prices?
The thing is that ethanol really got a bad rap from the food industry, the Restaurant Association and the Grocers of America and things like that, during that 2011 to 2013 peak. But the reality is that during that same time, no one really pointed out the fact that employment costs had grown, cost of transportation costs had grown significantly, packaging had gone up. All of these things had resulted in a significant increase, or at least at that time it was a perceived significant increase in food costs. And you couldn't turn on the news without hearing about how we were using food for fuel. reality is field corn, the corn that we use for ethanol production, is not used for food. I mean, it can feed cattle, but when you turn a bushel of corn into ethanol, you have distillers' grains that are produced that is actually a more concentrated food product for the cattle to eat. So you have some benefits there. But yeah, ethanol has, it replaced the MTBE when we pulled that out. So it kind of garnered almost a guaranteed certain percentage of inclusion in our fuel anyway. The one thing that we've seen in ethanol that has actually been a more significant gain lately has been China's move towards having a 10% ethanol mandate. Japan has actually looked to start importing some of our ethanol because the Brazilian sugar cane ethanol production has gone up in cost, because of sugar prices there and things like that. And at this point in time, I could stand here and confidently say that we, the American farmer has the ability to produce, as much ethanol, or at least as much food stock for ethanol as needed. And you really probably wouldn't notice a significant increase in food costs as a result, just because we've gotten really good at what we do. I say we, I mean the American farmer. The amount of bushel per acre we're able to produce is up substantially from the start of the ethanol boom. And in fact, we actually, with our leftover amount of corn that we have, we could see a further increase in blend rate, up to E15 even, and probably not notice any sort of blip in outside market factors or anything like that. So, but it is something that we watch very closely.
Angie, I'm so glad I asked you that question, because I had that misconception that, especially back then when food prices were going up, what a brilliant idea to burn food to drive our cars around when people were hungry. Yeah. So that really clarified it for me. I appreciate that. I'm sure if I had that misconception that I'm not the only one. So you're a great spokesperson for the ethanol industry.
Well, it was definitely something that we heard a lot of. It was definitely something that was a very contentious, and it still is. I mean, we still struggle with the restaurant association out there. We still struggle with a few groups that are against ethanol, and understandably so. I mean, I am very much, I don't like government involved in mandates or something of that nature, but we definitely needed that boost with the RFS to get started. We just got new news overnight that the EPA is leaving that mandate unchanged. So there's no increase there or any changes there, but now we're starting to see a healthy supply and demand driven market structure. I hope, with folks looking to use a little bit better blend, and there's really no, and some folks will argue this, but a lot of science can prove that there's really no cleaner source of octane out there. And of course, it's much better than the MTBE that we were using there, pre 2000, I think 13 or maybe earlier than that. But yeah, it's a hard thing because no one really wants to spend a lot of time really educating, you could say, the public anymore. It's one of those common, it's easy to say this and have folks fall in line sort of deal.
Educate us on one more issue. Is there anything in the new tax bill, whether it passes or not, that's going to affect grain prices, subsidies, etc.?
We're really watching the farm bill more than anything. The tax bill is there. There's a lot of talk about the estate tax and things like that. And I am almost as anti-political as they come. I mean, when I make a statement, it's more driven by my customers or the market structure or something like that than a political bias, as you could say. But, overall, at least at this point, I haven't seen anything. There is some concern, or there's always discussion about the estate tax and things like that. And, I'll be completely honest, I've never really known a farm that's been significantly hit by the estate tax. At this point, there's so much planning for succession in farms that there really shouldn't be anyone that really gets hit by that estate tax, at least in the agriculture industry. I mean, it's easy to point to and say, we're hurting our family farms and things like that. But overall, from what I've seen, there isn't really a significant, or there won't be a significant impact to agriculture in that the bill that at least has been proposed at this point.
What a great interview, Angie. It's really
Thank you.
Outstanding coverage. You're very eloquent talking about your special interest and your trading, and I wish you a lot of success for your customers and for you the rest of 2017 and into the future. And what's the best way people could follow you? I've already given out your Twitter handle at Goddess of Grain. Do you want to show your podcast where the girls talk about?
Yeah, we can do that. I actually was just looking because we'd had a conversation. We've got Girls Talk Ag, the Girls Talk Ag podcast. That one's a little bit more, I would say I'm not as eloquent in that one because it's more of letting my hair down and we discuss the issues that are going on in agriculture, the issues that farmers are facing, and then the issues that, you've got, I guess nowadays, with everything that's going on in the world, you've got your gender topics,
Right.
and so we talk about what it's like to be a mom in the industry. It's myself, I'm a grain trader or merchandiser, and I have a friend, my other partner in crime is Karen. She's an independent agronomist and business owner, and then we have our friend Jen, who is a farmer. She farms with her husband and father-in-law in Indiana. So we have a very wide view. Our biggest desire, of course, is to educate, but also make folks laugh. And then, Twitter is the best way to follow me if you want to kind of follow what's going on or what I'm watching in the market structure. That's
ceiling for women in agriculture. The ceiling's made of cotton, so you don't hurt your head, right?
So you don't hurt your head. That'd be nice. We actually need the cotton demand too, so it would be great. And that's one of the things that we talk about is the perception in agriculture is that it's very heavily male dominated, which it is. The greatest thing about being a woman in ag is you never have to wait in line to use the bathroom at a conference. So it's definitely one of those things that we talk about quite a bit.
What a pleasure. What a pleasure meeting you. Thank you so much for edifying our community on the grain complex. You can't eat gold, and I really think people need to pay attention to this. If there is going to be some type of shortage, dramatic opportunities present themselves in the grain complex. So very nice to meet you, and you're now my trading warrior sister.
Well, I appreciate it, and if anyone has any questions, tell them not to hesitate to give me a shout out on Twitter, and we can chat about it.
Well, have a great holiday season, Angie. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you. You too. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Okay, F.A.C.E, that's it. Just a quick look. Looks like the euro is popping, and even the weak sister, the Aussie, is popping as well. If you could see, I believe that, we're getting the pop in the euro, getting the pop in the Aussie. Thank you very much, all you viewers at investing.com. Thank you, F.A.C.E Warriors. And we'll wrap it up with a TGIF session tomorrow. Good hunting, and most of all, remember, don't just count your pips, count your blessings. Adios.